It's not vital that I do so. I'm just trying to figure out if I should. No, I think I might just open up a browser window on.
Log in the instructor's PC.
Oh, sure, make it easy. Fine. Fine.
You know, if you could open a browser window, might as well.
Yeah.
We do have this microphone on, so we just wanted to put a little wild sound into our live stream. We are now.
We are live. There's no mouse.
Oh,
Am I
it
missing?
was there.
I think I can do it all keyboard-wise. Install the mouse.
Yeah, because it was sitting right there.
It's not underneath those notes, is that? No, it's. Okay, so this is an opportunity for us to remember our Windows keystrokes. There's one for maximizing the window. Is it? Oh, it's
down in the cubby.
Down there. You know, sometimes you just feel like an idiot. This might be one of those times. Yeah. Excellent. It's just switched over to the different input. So,
Right.
how's your mom?
She's not good, but she's stable. You know, she's improving, but still not good. You know, it was a complete wipeout. You know, with her stroke. I spent Monday night, Tuesday morning, and they're working on things like swallowing. Yeah, that's kind of like where she goes. So, but she's able to move her arms, like lift up both arms, hold them, but then she has trouble releasing them to get them back down. So it's just, you know, little bits every day, but it's like everything, all of who she is up here. So,
Yeah.
You know, because he's at the point where when I was about to leave you at the airport, the nurse was saying, like, "Where's Robert?" And she would pick up her finger and point it to me. But when they say, "Could you hold up two fingers?" she would become like this. Like she's trying, but it's not happening. So that's where she is.
Boy, if there's not any greater reminder of how incredible the human brain is.
It's true. It's true. And just gotta. I come away from this whole thing like I've got to keep myself in that health too. Because I mean, any body could end up in the same situation.
Yeah.
Really, any body. You also end up in what they say about, you know, for a while you take care of your kids on a very, very basic level, and then at some point in the future it flips. Like kids take care of you. I was definitely feeling that.
Well, thank you for being here, despite
it's
a great pull elsewhere.
Well, you know, I was glad to be able to have it to the point where I could leave and like not feel like something bad was going to happen. And I needed to be there. Have a strange request.
No.
When you start your introduction, can you do like a "Hey everybody" into
just
the mic?
For
first thing called the audio. Give them a clap.
I can do that.
You are broadcasting. Hello. We're going to get started.
Can you hear me if I don't bend down? Is this the right height? Okay. If you're like me, you're always self-conscious with microphones, right? You know, too close, too far. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 15th Annual Teaching and Learning with Technology Symposium. My name is Matthew Roberts, and I'm a member of the Instructional Design for E-Learning team here at Grand Valley. On behalf of IDEL and the e-learning group overall, I'd like to say thank you to everyone whose physical, mental, and emotional energy has gone into making this day possible. I'd also like to thank the over 50 different presenters who are with us today, showcasing their knowledge and expertise for you. If you're wondering how to keep track of all those presentations, I'd like to point you to the mobile-friendly version of our symposium website. The site contains abstracts, links to resources, and much more. And the presenters page can help you keep track of which tables you'd like to visit and can even show you a map of where those presenters are in the room, so no one's getting lost. If you've been to previous symposiums, you can tell we're doing things a little bit differently this year. Our keynote and our poster presentations are in the same room. The symposium continues to grow, and one of the happy challenges we face then is finding the right space to hold it in. If you're looking for a seat and you're standing in the doorway, feel free to come in. There are extra chairs sprinkled throughout. Come and take one. Now, on the plus side of having everything right here, I'm sure no one's going to get lost going from the keynote to the poster sessions. So, in addition to our keynote and the faculty presentations, at each year's symposium, we also honor the winners of the Pew FTLC Teaching with Technology Award. To do just that, I'd like to hand things over to Christine Renner, Director of the Pew FTLC and Vice Provost for Instructional Development and Innovation. I looked it up.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure, it was my distinct pleasure actually in February at the Faculty Awards Convocation to present a number of awards related to teaching excellence. And we wanted to highlight 2 of those award winners today. So if Megan, and Maureen Wolverton, would you please join me at the podium? This year we were very honored to award 2 Teaching Excellence Awards, Teaching with Technology, to Megan Luttington-Knoll and Maureen Wolverton. And I'm delighted they are here to share some of the specifics of their innovations with you today at this e-poster session. But I wanted to just briefly mention the fact that we are so delighted and honored to be able to award you with this award, because educational technology, when used well, really contributes so deeply to student learning. And what we so appreciate about the connections really between Maureen's work in liberal studies and Megan's in management is that they share some things in common. Certainly that commitment to teaching excellence and that commitment to students, but also the way that they use educational technologies. There's a lot of similarities despite their disciplinary differences. So I wanted to highlight the fact that they both connect with students, that professor presence in an online learning environment. They do that very, very well. And they're both also committed to developing critical thinking in their students and really that critical reflection that we know is so important to the learning process. So we're very excited that both of these professors were honored for their work in these areas, which we know are very important for student learning. So would you please join me in honoring them again? Thank you. Thank you. So learn more at their tables and also come visit their offices to see their lovely awards and their little paperweights to confirm that they are, in fact, excellent teachers. Thank you. Back to you, Matt.
Thank you, Christine. In addition to visiting their tables, I'd also encourage you to take a look at the video that we have put together in which both award winners talk about teaching their use of technology. We've got some great video people here who put this together. It's available on the mobile website as well as on our Grand Valley IDEL website too. This year's symposium keynote is a tag team effort. Matt Boelkins and Robert Talbert are both members of the mathematics department here at Grand Valley. In addition to his role in the classroom, Matt Boelkins is the Director of New Student Advising and Registration. He is also a recipient of the Glenn A. Niemeyer Award for all-around academic excellence. To students, though, he is better known as the man who saved them a lot of money by authoring the free open source active calculus textbook, which is used by many classes here at Grand Valley. Robert Talbert is a well-known blogger, speaker, and I'd say guru on topics of pedagogy and mathematics education. He's a champion for placing learners first in education and making sure that everything else, including technology, supports them. Robert was last year's winner of the Pew Teaching with Technology Award, which he received for his extensive work with flipped instruction, classroom response systems, screencasts. I could go on forever. In today's keynote, which I'll switch back to, there we go. In today's keynote, Matt and Robert will invite us to join them in a conversation about technology and the humanity of the learners that we serve. So join me in welcoming Matt Boelkins and Robert Talbert.
That seems loud. Is it all right?
I think
Is that too loud? No? Good? All right.
I'm going to steal this.
Yeah.
If I can.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you all for being here today. It's a real privilege for us to be a part of this. For me personally, it's been part of my good fortune in life to work at Grand Valley now for almost 20 years. So this is my 18th year at the university. Robert has been here for 5, and from the moment that we got the chance to work together, we've been friends. And so one of the things that has been a part of our friendship is us talking together all the time about teaching. And when we got this shared invitation to give this keynote, we got together and began a conversation that's been enjoyable for both of us. And the idea that we had is what we would like to do is to kind of have a conversation in front of you. And so what we did is we decided to script a handful of questions, to share those questions with each other, to think about them a bit, and then not to practice. So what we hope this comes off as is a genuine conversation that hopefully you're a part of, that shares some of our thinking on this important topic, and that perhaps will spark similar ideas and thoughts in you. So to get us started, I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question. So Robert, what is it that you do to remember that every single student is a human being and therefore has a story?
Well, Matt, I really appreciate that question. This is something that's very important to me. I think about this constantly. And the simplest thing that I do to try to keep in mind that every student is a human being is just to simply take a look in the mirror. When I was a student, I did not have my act together at all. I was a hot mess as an undergraduate and as a graduate student. And it's frankly astonishing to me that I made it out of school, to be perfectly honest, and back into school now in a certain way. As an undergraduate, I was not the most mature person in the world. I was not the most emotionally stable person in the world. I got involved with a lot of things that I shouldn't have been involved with. I failed to get involved with things that I should have gotten involved with. And I just really suffered the consequences of a lot of bad choices when I was an undergrad and as a graduate student. And it took me a really long time to finally get it together. And I'm not really sure exactly how that happened, except in the presence of professors who helped me. And so every time I get a student whose behavior tempts me to think of them as sort of a loser, and we get these sometimes, they act immaturely, they don't show respect, they don't turn their work in on time. When they turn their work in on time, it's kind of bad. And you're very tempted to objectify that student. That's the easy way out for doing this. And so when I think about that, and I'm just so tempted to turn this person into an object, what I do is I try to think back to when I was in their shoes. And I can guarantee you that 90% of the time I was worse than this person I'm trying to objectify. So it's just a simple matter of remembering my own humanity. My behavior was at least as bad as any student that I have had, if not worse. Okay, so I try to remember this, and keep in mind that everybody's a work in progress. Every student has a backstory. Every student has some sort of battle that they're fighting with, some sort of struggle that they deal with every single day that we have no idea about what it even is unless we start thinking of them as human beings and putting them as people in front of our eyes, just like I look in the mirror at myself as a deeply flawed human being who's in constant need of regeneration of something. And so, maybe one day some of these students who are just can be as annoying as anything, and you just, oh, why am I having to deal with this? Maybe one day, they'll be up here in front of professors giving a keynote address about how they once had this professor that helped them remember that they were a human being too. Now, I have a choice every day when I'm confronted with students like that. I can be the person who objectifies them to take the easy choice, or I can be that other guy. Whichever way I choose, it's going to be my choice. Now, another thing I would say that I do to help remember humanity of students is to look at my kids, too. I have 3 kids, ages 7, 10, and 12. They're in 1st, 4th, and 6th grade, which is a really interesting 3 data points in the learning process, of 3 very distinct phases of learning. And, my approach to teaching changed utterly when we adopted our first child in 2004 at 8 months old. And she's adopted from China, and we bring this child home on the plane from China. She can't eat, she can't speak, she can't walk. And I go in a couple of weeks later to go back to my teaching job, and I see students who before I had thought, man, what's wrong with these students? Why can't they get their act together? And now I see them with new eyes. I see them as they went from where my daughter is to being a college student. Now, how did this happen? It's amazing, isn't it? It's kind of miraculous that people can go from virtually incapable of doing anything to being smart enough to get into a college. And from that point forward, I started realizing that there's an epic story that takes place between birth and 18 years old. And as much of a crazy time you might have with our students, you still want to know that story is so compelling. And I felt like I needed to understand where these students were coming from. So again, just to sum it up, I look at myself and I look at my kids, and that's all I need to know. So, Matt, I have a question for you. Okay. Have you ever used, to turn this around, okay, have you ever used technology in a way that failed to remember the humanity of students? I know you want to answer this with a flat yes, no, and give no details about this. But maybe the answer is no, in which case, please leave, because we're interested in any details you might provide if there's a yes answer to this.
Well, one of the things I was hoping to do was to come up in front of you all today and share my failures. So I'd be glad to do that next. And unfortunately, the answer to this is yes. And I'm certain that I've done it in multiple ways. But as I thought about this question, one experience from my time here at Grand Valley really rang true to me. And so quite some time ago at the university, it was the case that in our Banner system, Banner did not enforce prerequisites. So I had concerns about students in my classes where a student might have failed Calc 1 and then were registered in Calc 2, and I was concerned about the fact that they did that and thought that they could be successful. So out of care for my students, I would take my class lists before the semester started, and I would log into Banner, and I would go through them one by one and look up every student and build a spreadsheet and look at the data that was there, and then say, well, here are the students that hadn't met the prerequisites, and then I took it upon myself to contact them, and I would contact them by email because I had their email addresses in the system. So I'm using technology in two ways. One, of course, is to use the very feature of Banner itself and the data that's present there, but then to also use email. And I think over time, this grew for me where it wasn't just students who hadn't met the prerequisite, but it was students who I would look at their overall grade performance, perhaps in the mathematics major, and think, boy, this student isn't really doing very well. I wonder if they're self-advising. They should probably hear from somebody who knows what they're doing. And again, out of what were good intentions in my heart, I started reaching out to students and sending emails to them unsolicited, to students who I didn't know, to offer my opinion on where they stood with things and whether or not they were ready to take classes. And while I think that this was helpful to some students, I know that it wasn't helpful to others. And there was one particular instance where I just was so struck at how I had failed to remember the humanity of a student. And so I had looked up a student who was in my class, and I had seen the grade performance there. I had made a judgment on that student who I didn't know based on the scores that I saw there. I sent an email that said, I'm concerned that you're not ready to take my class because of this. And this student, out of the kindness of her heart, she wrote back in a really nice way, and she said two things. She said, Professor Boelkins, you don't know me. And she said, that semester my sister died. And that story is still hard for me to share today because I'm embarrassed of it, right? That I forgot. And immediately I was like, I am so sorry, and I'm such a jerk. Please forgive me. Please come take my class, and let's work and make you better, right? And so that was one of those moments in my life. I'm like, I'm going to stop doing this right now. I'm not going to do this again. I'm going to meet students in person and talk to them. And if there are problems, we'll figure it out together. And I've tried to take that that lesson to other places in my teaching life. And so one of those places is I still use technology in all sorts of ways and communicate regularly with students by email. But I've tried to really shift how I use email to communicate with students, to open a door to communication with them rather than to have them be judged by me. And so I'll give one example from my current classes. I use WebWork, which is a free online homework tool that we use to give our students lots of accountability in their work. It has an automatic scoring feature, so on the one assignment a week that my students do, I can run the scoring option and see how they did. I can get a report that shows what students have done. And then from the outset this semester, I said every time a student scores less than 70% on one of these assignments, I'm going to send them an email. And the emails don't say, wow, you're doing terribly at this, you need to drop the class, or something that's cold and calculated like that. Instead, it says, I noticed that you didn't do very well on this assignment. Are you okay? Do you need some help from me? Or I noticed that you didn't even complete the assignment. Are you doing okay? Or is there something else going on in your life? And I've been really struck by the response of students who've said things like, thank you so much for caring. I was afraid to ask for help. And so I've seen a real shift in that. And so despite the fact that I'm not at all proud of ways that I've failed in the past to remember the humanity of learners, I feel like I'm doing a better job at that. And I see some real benefits for how these technologies, if we keep that in mind, enable us to go forward. So after sharing that thought, I'd like us to shift gears a little bit and say, let's say that we stipulate from the outset that in all technology that we use, we should remember the humanity of learners and try not to make these mistakes, even though we will. The question that I would like to ask you next is, what are some features, maybe 3 features of a technology that you really look for when you go to use that in one of your classes in order to use it effectively in teaching? And maybe along the way, is there one feature that if a technology has it, that it's a non-starter for you?
Sure. So you asked for three things. My criteria for selecting technology and thinking about it is really three aspects of the same thing. And I would tag that same thing as accessibility. So accessibility to me has three basic facets to it. First of all, I think about economic accessibility. So the kind of software, hardware, and technology that I use in my classes really needs to be free or cheap. Otherwise, I'm probably not going to use it. That could also have something to do with having children, okay, free or cheap, or it doesn't happen. But it's also thinking about our students. I mean, they don't have uniformly a lot of resources to spend on technology that, you know, we don't really know. If I can find a free or cheap option, I am more than willing to sacrifice a little bit of functionality if it's free or cheap versus something that's a little bit more full-featured but extremely expensive. Now, as an example for this, I just want to talk about one specific thing here. So the graphing tools that we use in calculus and pre-calculus and below. So we have these tools, I'm sorry for the feedback there. We have these tools that we use that will allow students to take mathematical functions and put them up into a visual format so they can learn to extract information about these functions and make conclusions about them. Now, for this is a technology that we've had a lot of discussions in the math department about this that sometimes go somewhere, and sometimes not so much. Occasionally, actually produce something. But this is, I think, the modern mathematics class really can't live without this kind of technology. I'm just going to come out and say it. This is a technology that cannot be unchosen once it's been chosen. The default for many years has been this thing. Okay, this is a TI-83 graphing calculator. How many? Yeah, I get the knowing looks around the room like, oh yeah. Okay, this is there's a TI-83, there's a TI-86, a TI-89. They haven't quite made it out of the 80s yet, like in more than one sense. Okay. All right. The current state of the art on the graphing calculator actually is the TI Inspire, which is a monstrosity of a device that's almost the size of like a computer, a small computer, and has about half the functionality. This technology here was the default in the 90s. I remember very clearly as a graduate student in the 90s, we were just starting to have the conversation about whether we should be using these tools here. So as you can see here, there's a lot of buttons. You can enter in functions and graph them and see them, two functions at the same time, and compare them, for instance. This is a really quite revolutionary technology at the time, and we were very glad to have this. Okay, this is something that we had not had before. This technology has not appreciably changed since 1995. It also hasn't gotten appreciably any less expensive since 1989. A TI-86 graphing calculator will still cost you $119 at Office Depot. And it does one thing. It does this. Okay? It does not connect to other devices. It does not do anything in color. It's just this monochrome screen. Okay? It does what it does, and it does what it has been doing since 1988-ish. I got an HP calculator for graduation in 1980, whatever, you know. And it wasn't much different than this, and it's still not that much different. Now, fast forward to 2016, and we have Desmos.com. Okay, Desmos.com is a free online graphing calculator. Here's a little screenshot for it. It's a beautiful piece of software. It's kind of hard to guess the coloring in here, but it graphs in color. It formats the output nicely. It connects to Google Drive. It's easy to share. All you have to do is copy a link and share it out. And oh, by the way, it's completely free. It's completely free as opposed to $120. Okay, now I ask you, why exactly should I expect students to buy a graphing calculator for $120, which is a significant portion of a student's material possessions in some cases, where I can also ask them to pull out their smartphone, download the free app that connects to Desmos.com and use it instead? That's what I mean by economic accessibility. This is a lot more economically accessible than this. Okay. Now, another form of accessibility that I think about is physical accessibility. Okay, whether or not the technology can actually be picked up and carried and moved from one place to the other. I was in college during, again, 1980 something or other, where the technology was the VAX VMS mainframe. Believe it or not, this is pre-internet days. Now, those things were awesome, but they were not portable. Okay, they were movable, but not portable. Okay, it was those old-fashioned computers that you have to box up and carry with a handle. I'm interested in technology that is agnostic with respect to the hardware that it runs on, that can be possessed by students at any context whatsoever. Now, going back to the graphing calculator, this is pretty small. I mean, it's this big. Okay, so it's portable. It's fine. But suppose I drop it. Suppose it gets rained on. Suppose anything. Suppose that the hardware somehow fails. Okay, the batteries corrode. We've seen it 100 times in the math department. Sometimes it's true. Okay, when students, oh, my dog ate my calculator. It could happen. Okay, so what happens? Well, if you have a graphing calculator and the hardware goes kaput, that's too bad. You have to pay another $120 to get the same technology. With something like Desmos, which is a free product, it runs on a web browser. It runs in free apps on any operating system you wish. So if I have an Android smartphone, but if I change my mind next week and I want an iPhone, or if my dog eats my phone or something happens, I haven't lost anything. Okay, that's much more physically accessible than a graphing calculator. Even though they're both sort of equally portable, they're not as accessible. And we're printing one out right now, actually, just to have, so you can have one in place. See how portable that is? A final means of accessibility that I think about is intellectual accessibility. Okay, how easy is it for a person to just pick up and use the technology? I really want students to have like almost no learning curve when they're using a technology for my class. It ought to be simple above all. Okay, I make fun of a printer like that, but I mean they're getting to the point where 3D printers, for example, are getting simpler and simpler and simpler to use, almost just like plug and play. Now, I just want to go back again to pick on graphing calculators some more, because this is just something I do in the department, as you know. Okay, so if you want to graph the screen that you see here, you have to kind of go back and forth through multiple layers of menus to get the functions entered in, kind of hard to see, but this one's a little bit darker than this one is, and so it's doable. It's very, very doable, but it takes some work here. Now, on the other hand, compare that to, suppose that a student is working on, there is a little bit of math in this presentation, okay, just letting you know. So suppose a student is in an Algebra 2 class and they're working on understanding this equation here, which is the standard form for a parabola. Okay, there's these three parameters in it, A, B, and C. And we're trying to understand, what do these parameters do? If I change the numbers out on A, B, and C, what happens? If I'm using a graphing calculator, I have to make about 20 of these to really get it. Okay, or I can go over to Desmos and start doing this. Now I can just enter this in, and as you can see, I just enter it in exactly straight off the keyboard as it appears. And as I type, it formats it for me. Once I get all the parameters laid out, I just click on that button that says all, and there are the sliders, and I can move the sliders back and forth. And oh, I guess the B kind of shifts it left and right, I guess. The C kind of raises it up and down. The A seemed to sort of flip it over possibly. That's like 30 seconds. And you don't have to do anything. You just have to have hands and a keyboard. That's it, okay? Now I ask you, okay, economic accessibility we talked about, physical accessibility we talked about, intellectually, which of these is easier to work with than the others? Which do you think that your least persistent students are going to stick with and actually use in the outcome? That's what I'm talking about when I refer to accessibility of something. Okay, so accessibility, economic, physical, and intellectual. That's what I look for. And if a technology fails on any of those points, I'm thinking I'm not going to use it. If it fails on two or more of them, I'm definitely not going to use it. So that's my non-starter. So what about you? Was I going to ask you that question? What about you?
I think you were asking me a different one.
Okay, all right, I'll ask you a different one. How about this one? This is even better.
Well, one thing I'll just say is, like, so when it comes to like what technology to choose and why, I just pretty much defer to Robert, right? So if I have a question, I just go ask him, and then I accept that, and then I move on, and it simplifies my life. So, yeah.
Okay, so I'm like a technology for you. I'm like your filter. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
He's free. He's accessible, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's kind of hard to pick me up and move me, though. It's getting harder every day. So anyway, I guess the question I was going to ask you before my discourse here. So what are some of your favorite examples of using technology that encourage human relationships in teaching and learning, Matt?
Sure. Two that I want to share. One is to use Google Forms. And so I use Google Forms with my classes in several different ways. One way that I always use them is at the start of the semester, where I have a get to know you survey. So my students are asked to tell me who they are. Why are they taking the class? What are their professional dreams? What would they like to become? I always ask students, what are your top 3 goals in life? I ask them to read the syllabus and then to ask if they have questions about the course. And so right at the start, when I'm getting to know students' names, I also get to see some of how they think and have every student have voice right from the start of the term. I try to use those in the same way at later points in the course, almost always with a midterm feedback survey, where the same thing I go and I ask my students, in this case anonymously, what's going well for you? What's effective for your learning that we're doing in the course that you think we should keep doing? What's something that you wish was different? And I'll often ask that in a couple different ways, so that one chance they get is to answer, how would I myself as a student behave differently? That kind of feedback in the middle of the course has been able to give me a good sense of how things are going, to see if my students are really frustrated but they're afraid to tell me in person, and then to make adjustments as we go. And so I've really appreciated the free and easy accessibility of Google Forms, and the way that I can get so much information easily. A second tool that I have been using lately is the iAnnotate app for marking up PDFs. And I know this is a familiar thing to many folks, but what I have used it primarily for is when I teach our Intro to Proofs class, I have the students submit drafts. It's an SWS course where they have multiple revisions available to them. They submit drafts in PDF to a dedicated Gmail email address that I have, so I don't have to mess with this cluttering up my email inbox. I have that set up on my iPad. I open the files and I annotate, I mark them up, but then I add one more thing, and I add a 60-second audio clip of feedback from me. And I think that this has really, in a class where when a typical document comes in, it takes me 8 to 10 minutes to read it. The document is covered with multicolored marks on it, and don't do this and do this and that, that at the end I can stop and say, in my voice, you've made a really good start. You have some good ideas and you're on the right track. The 3 biggest things that you need to work on are this, this, and this. I'm limited to 60 seconds, but the students get to hear my voice. And I think that helps. It helps hopefully demonstrate that in that grading process that I care about them, that I'm interested in their success, and hopefully preserve some of that more human relation, even though everything that we're doing is trading electrons. So this is a question I would like to hear from you on as well, though. So what are some of your favorites in terms of uses of technology that preserve the humanity or enhance it?
Well, I'm just going to stick to one, my all-time favorite, actually, which emerged last summer. I was teaching our very first fully online course in calculus. It was a totally uncharted territory for us. We've never offered an online course before, fully online. Tons of hybrid courses, but not one fully online. So these calculus students were working on, we mentioned our online homework system, WebWork, which presents students with exercises. They work them out on paper, then they enter the answers into a blank, and it checks whether the answer is correct or not, but it does no feedback on the solution process, which is the most important part. Now, in a face-to-face class, we would be possibly doing this, checking solutions in a number of ways, through written solutions that are handed in, through a journal or something like that. In an online course, asynchronous online course, it's a little harder. We can't have students go up to the board because there's no meetings, for instance. This is a cultural thing we had to really get our minds around in the department. So I had this idea that I wanted students to go to find a whiteboard somewhere and film themselves working out solutions to their homework and post it to YouTube instead. Maybe I spent too much time on YouTube, but I felt like, hey, let's take a math selfie, okay, a video math selfie. Okay, I had no idea if this is going to work or not, but it really worked beyond my wildest imaginations. That students really took this idea and ran with it. So they would just simply go to the library or in their houses or apartments and just pick 2 problems and write up the solution for it. Keep a camera on you, and you have to have your face, your voice, and your handwriting in the frame at all times. That was originally to be sort of a biometrics to make sure you're not cheating. Okay, so you lose any one of those 3 things, and somebody else could be doing it. But what it did was it created a community in the class, because up until that point, these students were just entries in a spreadsheet. They were just names on a discussion board. But all of a sudden, I know what she looks like and how she speaks and her cadence and her style and her sense of humor, and everybody kind of got to know each other. And it had this really interesting effect that when you hand in a homework problem in a math class to a professor, it's quite tempting to just sort of blast out a bunch of alphabet soup and hand it in and hope for the best and let the professor sort it all out. Whereas if you're creating something for your peers, you put yourself in the mind of your peers. And this is something that's sadly quite absent from a lot of courses. A lot of students that I've encountered, they're out for themselves. They want to get their grade, and that's all they care about. Now students are thinking about, what is the other person going to think when I put this up on YouTube, on this private YouTube channel that I created for the class. Super easy to use. Technology is dead simple. The hardest part was just people finding whiteboards. Honestly, that was the hardest technology, and the biggest problem was finding a whiteboard. And it created this community in the class that was really, really great. And I feel like it helped a lot of other cognitive development things as well. But creating that community in an online course, in any course, is difficult. And I felt like that technology really went a long way in creating it. So that's my all-time favorite. We're rolling with it too. I see Shelley Smith in the back, and she and I are doing stuff with Calc 2 right now on that. So wrapping it up here, I have one last question for you, Matt, and that's this. What advice would you give to someone who is thinking about using technology in new ways in his or her teaching?
Sure. The first thing I would say is technology is not a panacea, right? Technology is something that can make learning better, but it can also make learning worse. And so you have to be really careful with it in that way. I think we get excited when we see what other people do, and we think that it's going to fix things. But for me, one of the things that I've come to as kind of a conclusion in my life that I've made about teaching, and it's part of what I like about teaching, is that teaching is not a solvable problem. Is that new students present new challenges. There isn't one way to do it right. One thing that works with some students doesn't work with others. And so I don't necessarily think that technology can provide anything to us other than a tool that we can hope to use well. So I would say, as advice for that, I would say, first off, use your colleagues, right? There's a ton of really smart people who work at this university and who are doing all sorts of cool things. Today's a great example of that, to walk around and see what people do and to learn from them, right? So that's a great thing to do to start. And then at the same time, I would encourage people to remember another thing that I love about teaching, and that's that teaching is deeply personal. So there are things that Robert does in his courses that I totally respect and admire and wish I could do, but they don't fit because I'm not him. And so, and I see that with many of my colleagues. So I would encourage anyone to think too, what is it that you do personally that works well for you, and how might technology enhance that? A couple of other short thoughts. I would say, start small. So I've been really impressed over and really fortunate in my long career to find ways that by starting small, things have really grown. 15 years ago, I wanted to stop lecturing in calculus, so I wanted to have my students do active learning things. And so I started writing activities for my classes. In the first semester, I probably wrote 6. And then the next semester, I wrote another 6. And then I stole some from some friends. And pretty soon, I had a 100-page booklet that I could give to students that had 30 of them. And then I got a sabbatical, and it became a book. And so you see over time that things that start small grow, and we don't know what that holds. So don't be afraid to start small, because great things come from that. And then one last thing that I would share that I think is important and that is tied to something I've mentioned before, and that's listen to your students. Right? It's really important to ask them what they think, and whether you do that personally and face-to-face in a humane way, or you use something like a Google form, I think that that's a really valuable thing to do. About 12 years ago, on a total fluke, on a day that I happened to just have some extra class time, I asked a class I was teaching, so you guys have already done written course evaluations, why don't you just tell me face-to-face what you thought of the class? And it was simultaneously like petrifying and electrifying, right? and what I learned, and I've done this almost every semester in almost every class since, what I learned is that to ask students face-to-face, you get way more information. So one person says something and the whole class nods, right? Or several other people shake your head, or they say something that's kind of weird, and you can ask them what they mean by it, as opposed to reading it in a written evaluation that you don't know who they are. And so I think that this listen to your students and make them collaborators is a really key thing with however we do anything in teaching, but with technology in particular. So I'd love to hear some advice from you as well.
Yeah, a lot of my advice would just sound a lot like yours. I'm just going to kind of boil it down to the way I see it. Yeah, I totally agree. I have this feeling that teaching and learning are primarily about relationships. They're about relationships between people, between ideas, and between people and ideas. And our whole higher education system is just a long process of forging these lifelong relationships. And technology is only useful in the classroom insofar as it fosters and enables those relationships. And so that would be my first advice. You don't lead with the technology, you lead with people, and you lead with relationships. Okay, you always ask yourself, or I'm always asking myself, okay, I have this pedagogical goal that I want to accomplish in my class, and I think technology could be useful. What is the simplest, cheapest, smallest, best answer to the technology that I could possibly use that would forge the relationships and move them forward. That's the way we think about it. It's very tempting to find, I get it. I love technology. I love playing with new toys, new tools. I mean, just ask my wife. I mean, my wife sometimes believes that I prefer gadgets to people, which sometimes, some days, that could possibly be very true. But that's fine if you're a hobbyist, but it's not fine if you're a professor. If you're a professor, you lead with people and you lead with relationships, and the technology serves those. That would be my first and primary piece of advice. Second and last for today piece of advice would be, really take the time, find the time to immerse yourself both in the world of educational technology and I would say in the world of the scholarship of teaching and learning about educational technology. Say you want to use clickers in your classroom. You've heard about clickers, great things about clickers, and you just want to use them. Well, unless you're really aware of what's out there about the technology of clickers and where it's changing and what's coming over the horizon, you might not be aware there are several different brands of hardware clickers. There are several different solutions for software versions of clickers. There are apps, there are websites. Unless you know these things, you're not going to make the best decisions for your students. So I know we're all short on time in our lives, but this is one of those things where we got to make the time to immerse ourselves and learn about what's out there in the world of educational technology. And you also might not be aware that there's about 20 years of research that backs up the use of clickers in teaching in the form of peer instruction and one such pedagogical model. And if that's the first time you ever heard that term, this is what I'm saying. Get yourself involved in the world of scholarship of teaching and learning and see what's out there. What I do to kind of make the time for it is I budget 1 hour a week, about this time on Wednesdays, the 1 to 2 o'clock hour, to read one research paper a week in scholarship of teaching and learning. It doesn't have to be a deep reading, just maybe I'll skip the methods section and go straight to the beginning and the end, you know how that is sometimes. And so in the course of a year, you can read upwards of 50 research papers, okay? And you're gonna have a much better idea of what can be done and what is known scientifically about how people learn with this technology and therefore make much better decisions. So you lead with people and relationships and you learn as much as you possibly can about how all this stuff works in the first place. This is a very good start. Okay, because we have people in the room, you're forging relationships, and you're picking up ideas. So do this, but more of it. Okay, so that's about all we got time for, Matt. It's too bad because we talk about this stuff a lot in the department. The more the merrier in our discussions as far as I'm concerned. So just to wrap things up here, thank you for your attention. I have a page here of contact information for Matt and myself with our websites and Twitter and email. Speaking for both of us, we both invite further conversation about this in person, online, or in any medium whatsoever. We thank you for your time. We hope you have a great rest of the day at the symposium. Thanks again.
Thank you.
I think we have a few minutes just for some questions before we break. So I have a microphone. If you have a question, I will find you, and Matt and Robert can reflect upon what your question is.
This is sort of off what you were talking about. I'm Jerry. I'm from nursing. My question is, what do you think about using Twitter as a faculty person and as a way to communicate with your students?
So I personally have a Twitter account because Robert told me I should have one. It was actually, and he was right, it was actually a way to promote a free book that I'd written, right? And it was a way to, it's so democratic, right? But so I personally don't use it to communicate with students. I know some of our colleagues in the department, do you use it directly with your students?
What I find is a lot of students aren't on Twitter. That's when I look at where they are in social media. Social media in general, it's possible. Twitter, it's very hit or miss. So I have a lot of students who are on Twitter, but as Matt, you were tweeting me last night, there's a difference between being on Twitter and really on Twitter. You have an account. Here's how I would answer that question. What about Twitter? Okay, what is the pedagogical problem I'm trying to solve? Okay, with that particular technology, is it a problem of, or what's the potential benefit? Okay, if it's increased participation with students, then Twitter could be a good choice if they're already on it. My experience with these sorts of things, and Slack is another kind of communications technology that's been out there, is if people are forced to have yet another inbox to have to check, it's going to cause more problems than it solves. I love Twitter. I'm on Twitter way too much throughout the day. Just check my stream and you'll be appalled possibly at how many there is. But and if you find your students are on Twitter and using it, I think it could be a helpful medium. If they're not on it, I would be hesitant to get them on it, possibly. You could try it on a trial basis and just see if it works, okay? But beware of making students, again, going back to the relationships, beware of requesting more and more cognitive space from students for things like more inboxes. That would be just tread carefully there.
I would also just add, our colleagues John Golden and Dave Coffey in the math department would be really good contacts for you if you wanted to pursue that question, because John and Dave have both used Twitter with their classes in innovative ways, especially in seminar-based classes for future teachers. So where the teachers are a lot of times they're out in the schools and more, and they need a way to communicate with students not in the classroom. So.
Yeah, I'm looking at a screen here that says using Twitter to support student learning and engagement. That you guys okay? You probably know way more than I did. My Twitter just went off actually. So yeah. Awesome. That's probably, yeah.
Hashtag TLTS16. All right. Other questions? Don't be shy.
We're math professors. We're used to awkward silence, right? When people ask for questions.
Just look at your shoes, Matt. It's all good.
So I'm Erica Hamilton. I teach in the College of Education. We often talk about unplugging versus plugging in. Just personally, how do you find a balance? And then do you ever talk to your students about when to plug in and when to unplug?
Can I take that first? This is something I feel very strongly about, actually, as a person who does a lot of technology. For me, it all comes to a stop at 6 p.m. every night, and it picks up again at 6 a.m. the next morning. That's just a rule that I have for myself. There's no screens, there's no TV, there's only my Kindle for reading before I go to bed. The same thing with my kids, and they really hate that. And as far as, so that's, it's one of those things you got to build a discipline to just say, okay, I'm done. 12 hours a day in front of a screen is really more than enough for a normal human being. And for my students, I will say this, for my online course, there is a little clause built in there where I say, I will be available for questions throughout the week, but from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., I'm dark. Okay. On Sundays, I'm dark because that's a day for family, that's a day for rest, that's a day for everything else. And I build the schedule so it encourages them to do the same thing. So nothing's required on the weekends. Okay, the weekends is just open time to do whatever you want to. So this is a matter of thinking about what makes for a balanced human being, and very simply building it into your syllabus and laying out the guidelines. I feel like if you set up a policy of being quite prompt about responding to student emails, like 12-hour rule, for example. It's like if you send me an email on a business day, I will get to it within 12 hours. Okay, if you send it on Saturday night, it's going to get gotten to, if that's a word, on Monday morning. So you just need to know this going into it. I think students have been fine with that. So, but it's a discipline. It really is, because we know how it is. I mean, there's screens all around us. There's constant opportunities for engagement that we have to decline sometimes.
And I think that I think more and more it's incumbent on us as people at a university to start having conversations with our students about these kinds of issues and how to be successful in their studying. In many aspects of my job, I'm concerned about this, but I'm increasingly concerned about our students' ability to focus and to be on task and to manage, right? And I think that we need to have some overt conversations with our students about this. I do a lot of electronic things with students, right? The textbook that I use in my calculus class, they can access as a free PDF. They use WebWork, this online system. They use GeoGebra, which they can use online. So their computer needs to be a vibrant part of their lives. And at the same time, I totally understand that that's where Facebook and email and all these other things are. And I'm concerned as I watch students work outside my office that the combination of Facebook on their computer and their phone sitting next to them and more, that these other technologies are a really major distraction. I know they are for me. Right? I know my phone, which we've been using for a timer up front, has been going off with my friends texting me, right? So there's, right, I understand the distraction of how these things happen. But I think that that's a key thing to talk with students about, and even just to share with them how we work, right? Like I think Robert's is a great example. I've been sharing very directly with students in my office just how I make a to-do list for the week and how I schedule my time and how I get things done as my students complain about all the stuff that they seem like they're unable to do. And I find that many of them don't have a written plan or haven't thought about these things carefully. So I think there too, as we build relationships with students and we think about how we use technology, there's opportunities for us to mentor them and share with them things that will help them be more successful, which is what we really all want to see.
Yeah, if I could just say one last thing about that.
Absolutely.
As we use more technology in the classroom effectively, our role shifts as professors from being the so-called sage on the stage, the guide on the side, the coach, right? And so part of the coaching mentality is teaching students how to be students. I mean, teaching them how to be effective adults in the regular world. I've been doing flipped instruction for almost 10 years now, and year in, year out, my biggest struggle with that is not students want to hear more lectures, is that students have no idea how to manage time, tasks, projects, and other things that have to be managed. And this is just something that a grown-up has to be able to do. And so I find myself increasingly intentionally building in things like the Getting Things Done philosophy by David Allen, which is like a second religion for me in some ways. And just like, okay, have you ever made a checklist? Have you ever made a calendar? I have students who've never used a calendar before. Never use a calendar before. They write stuff on their arms, and that's how literally, this has happened.
Palm Pilot.
Yeah, right. Yeah, most students today do not know what a Palm Pilot is.
I know, that's partly why it's funny. Right?
Does anybody in the room know what a Palm Pilot is? So yeah, this is part of what higher education, I feel like, is looking more and more like. Now, fortunately, if we're using technology correctly, we got space and time for that. But yeah, it's an ongoing struggle, and something I think that if we're caring about students as human beings, this is something that's like, we got to pull them aside and teach them explicitly how to do it.
I've used that joke before myself, man. Before I get to Rita's question, just one plug. Maybe you'll be lucky enough, if you enter the raffle, to win the book Make It Stick, which is a great summary of a lot of the research about learning that's been coming out the past few years, and very much focused upon the question of learners as human beings. So with that, Rita.
Real quick, this is really a plug about a DVD that I just got. I'm the librarian for the Curriculum Materials Library, and just in yesterday was a DVD on social media addiction.
Right. Another book that I would recommend to go with that DVD is a book one of my classes is reading right now called It's Complicated by Dana Boyd. It's called It's Complicated, The Social Lives of Network Teens. And she's a sociologist that did this study about teenage social media use, and it's fascinating. There's a fine line between addiction and just simply using a new medium to find your identity as a teen. And our students are adults, but they used to be teens not too long ago, right? So we're having interesting conversations about that. I'm learning a lot by reading that book, so I would encourage everybody to snag that.
Called The Information Diet by Clay Johnson. Yeah, it's not so much about social media, but about information and digital hygiene in general. Other questions?
That's awesome.
Hi, Matt Ruin, University Libraries. You've talked about kind of the economic accessibility of the technologies and tools that you use. Very often the more expensive or kind of commercial alternatives to those come with a lot of things to make the job of an instructor or an educator easier. Pre-made lesson plans or exercises or things like that. What are your thoughts on the, I guess that trade-off between, free materials that or more economically accessible technologies that might not have as many, bells and whistles, and the more expensive ones that can save you time?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is. Well, I would say, first of all, Matt, you can pitch in on this too, is I know what you're talking about, because like online homework systems for us, for example, we use WebWork, which is a free tool that's published by the Mathematical Association of America. It's not 100% fabulous. It's got some definite downsides to it. If the question banks are publicly contributed, and so you know how that can go. Versus if you have a Pearson textbook, for example. There are no Pearson reps in the room here? I'm about to sort of trash Pearson. Okay, live stream, hi. Pearson products can be very good, and I've had a good relationship with Pearson myself. But they do this, right? They package in online homework systems or some sort of course management system with their books, and so it's not so much the book that you adopt; it's the stuff with the book. Not all of those things really make the instructor's life simpler, I would say. Sometimes the quality of them is really not that great. sometimes it doesn't match the instructor's style. And so even though it's pre-built, we don't want to conclude just because it's pre-built that it's going to make your life easier. Okay, so I would just say that sometimes you spend a little bit more energy, but it gets you a lot more mileage because it's you making the materials and it's your students that you're making them for versus something that's off the rack. Okay, so that would be my out for that, is to say, like, I feel like even though, like, I'm making notes up for my Math 325 students right now. We have a book that we can use, okay, and it's the book's all right, okay. My stuff is all right, but I know that I'm making my things up with my students in mind, so it's going to be a better fit, even though it's cost me a little bit more work time. So that's the real trade-off for me.
And I think sometimes, like the publishing houses, they're absolutely motivated by profit, right? So they're looking for contracts where they're going to get money from students and instructors, and they're looking to make lives easier. But I'm not sure for us at a place like Grand Valley that's a good fit, right? We're not high school teachers who are teaching 7 or 8 hours a day and don't have time to plan what's right for our students, right? I look at, when I think of our teaching loads and what we're doing, it absolutely should be personalized to our students. And if all we're doing is we're providing prepackaged materials so that somebody can go in and more or less read words that are on a page, that's a strategic liability to our university, right? They're not doing what our students need. So I think that again, that personal side of teaching is really important, and that we need to encourage and support instructors who embrace it, and we need to get people to share it. So I've seen in multiple ways in my own department, in the professional community that I'm a part of, and more, that as people do things that are really good in teaching and then they share them and they make them open source so that other people can use them, they keep getting better. And WebWork is a really good example of that, which is an open source software. Right. And we see it that the book that I've written is a part of a growing collection of mathematics textbooks that are free and open source, and there's more people that are going to write them. It's only going to get better. And when you can do these kinds of things as a way to first serve your own students, like our colleague Ted's book in the math department that's now available free too, written for Grand Valley students, built right for them, but people around the world are enjoying it. I think there's a lot to be said for that, even though some of those publishing houses produce high quality stuff.
Any last questions? Well, if not, please join me in thanking our speakers with a round of applause. One last note before we transition to our poster presentations. We have an exciting set of raffle prizes to give away today. In order to qualify, make sure you put your name and your contact information on your raffle slip and get the signatures of 5 different presenters, and then deposit your slip in the box out on the table by the registration table. If you're a presenter yourself, don't worry. We've actually already pre-entered you in the raffle to make your life easier. Winners will be announced at 4 p.m. And while we'd love you to stay for the entire afternoon, I know that some people have to go. You do not need to be present in order to win. We'll just hunt you down and bring it to you. And with that, I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you. Back and a back. Don't forget, we've actually got 4 tables of presentations out in the concourse atrium as well. We are growing so much, now we're spilling out and consuming the entire library, so it's a good thing.
One loud.